Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Forbi. Today I have a very special video for you guys. Today we're going to be talking about how to improve your aim in Apex Legends. So today we have many tips and topics to talk about on how to improve your aim. The first couple of topics are going to be more primarily for my M&K players, but we will be talking about topics that are relevant both to M&K and controller later on in the video. But some of the topics that we're going to be talking about today is about aim training, how to use the firing range effectively, how to strafe correctly so that you're shooting straight, reading enemy movement and how they're strafing, talking about analyzing other creators and how they're playing the game, as well as using R5 to improve and play if you're a PC player, as well as mindset and how you approach different fights and how you play the game, as well as just having fun overall with how you play it and what you're doing. All right, with that being said, I suppose we kick it off with topic number one being aim training. Now, aim training is one of those things for M&K players where it's not 100% necessary to do, but it will definitely help you improve in terms of building that consistency with your aim and being able to be confident in your aim and rely on it. Now, aim training can be done with many different programs, but the primary two that most people use are AimLab and Kovacs. Now, I am someone who uses Kovacs personally. I can give you guys 100 different scenarios, but one thing I will highly recommend is there is a gentleman by the name of Rid, by the way, who has a comprehensive GitHub that has a lot of different Kovacs scenarios and AimLab scenarios that allow you to use different fundamentals and practice, specifically Apex scenarios or specifically Overwatch scenarios, whatever you may want to play. But in this case, we're going to be talking about Apex. So I'll leave a link down to that below. But I do want to talk about the different aspects of aim training and how that can allow you to improve in game. And it's going to be dynamic clicking. Now, this is a little bit less relevant, but still very relevant for Apex, strictly because of the semi-automatic weapons existing, like the Wingman or the Scout or the 30-30. These are very good scenarios to play for these specific guns because it allows you to practice click timing. I won't spend too long on all of these scenarios and these different types, but I do want to express the importance of them so that you guys understand why they're important and how you can use them in game. Now, number two is going to be static clicking, which is way less relevant for Apex, but it's still pretty relevant because if you're trying to shoot something that is, static in motion, it'll allow you to switch from those targets quickly, be able to, tap one and then tap another. Number three is going to be precise tracking. Now, this is very relevant for Apex because precise tracking allows you to essentially, let's just give you an example, right? We have a legend that's strafing in one direction, and that is essentially your cue to be precise in what you're doing. Now, the second half of that is going to be reactive tracking, which is where, you're playing against someone who has a pretty wild strafe. They're AD strafing, potentially lurch strafing, and you have to be reactive to that strafe to be able to track it. Now, reactive tracking is going to be a lot more prominent in Apex Legends because of the strafe mechanics in the game, and that's something that we're going to be talking about later in this video. But reactive tracking would probably be the number one thing that I recommend to practice with Apex. And like I said, I have a lot of different scenarios and playlists down in the description from Rid to help you practice that. Now, the other half of the spectrum is target switching. Now, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of target switching, but target switching is a very niche aim topic, but it can help you drastically in game if it is one of those situations where you really need it. Now, target switching is where you switch from one target to another target very quickly. Now, there are a lot of people that think that when you're doing this, you're cheating, but I can assure you that this is an aim mechanic that many people utilize, and it can help you greatly in fights if you can switch from one target to another quickly and get that extra damage off. Now, all of these different aim training topics are things that you can use effectively to help you improve in game. Don't just aim train blindly and practice and never think about it while you're in the game. Aim training is a tool for you to use and practice what you're doing. Now, when you are aim training, what you should be doing when you get into the game is trying to mimic what you were doing in the aim training scenario and doing it in game. So if you're playing a reactive tracking scenario, you're looking to be as reactive as possible while you're in game because that is what you just practiced. So keep being conscious of what you just did and what you were playing on your aim trainer, and then trying to do that in game is where you're going to see the most improvement. For topic number two, we're going to be talking about firing range practice. Now, Firing range practice is one of those things that you should be doing every single time that you launch the game. Before you get into one of your main games and start playing with your boys, you should be sitting in the range for a minimum 10 minutes before you start playing. Firing range is extremely important to use to your advantage in this game, especially with the newer version of the firing range. There are a million different ways to practice a million different things with Apex in the firing range, and you need to be using that. Number one of those things is going to be trying to fight all of the bots all at once to try and build that pressure for yourself so that you're used to having to fight multiple people at once and having to, you know, switch targets and, you know, move around. It will help you build that consistency to where you're not clunky while you're playing in game and you're able to, you know, focus on your aim without having to necessarily worry about what you're doing and building that eye-hand coordination. Now, the firing range is also great for practicing your sprays and your recoil control and being able to control all of those things, practicing your strafes and anti-mirroring and mirroring, which if you guys don't know what those are, we will be talking about that more later in the video. But the firing range is one of those things where it is at your disposal to help you. Now, I personally sit in the range for about 20 minutes before I start stream, and then I'll sit in the range for another 20 to 30 minutes while I'm talking to my chat, and that is my warm-up for the day. Now, for a lot of people, I would recommend, you know, sitting on Kovacs for another 20 to 30 minutes before you hop into the range and then practicing there. And that was the way that I did things for well over a year, which is one of the reasons why I improved as quickly as I did. However, the firing range is, you know, it is such a good tool for you to use and practice all the different things that you want to learn. So when I'm sitting in the firing range, you know, I'm not only practicing my aim by shooting at, you know, all the different bots and practicing moving on all those different bots, but I'm also getting my left hand, my keyboard hand warmed up by, you know, doing all the different movement techs, by super gliding, mantle jumping, fatigue bouncing, everything. I'm practicing everything when I go to warm up, and that is how I get myself ready to hop into the game. So for topic number 3, we're going to be talking about strafing. Now, strafing is one of the most important things that you can possibly have in Apex, and I'm not going to be talking about the advanced fundamentals of strafing, like all the lurching and the neo strafing and all that jazz. However, I'm going to be talking about your basic strafe and how to utilize those strafes to your advantage. Now, the number 1 and number 2 strafes that I absolutely tell everyone to use to their advantage is mirroring and anti-mirroring, and you heard me mention that just a minute ago. But mirroring and anti-mirroring are two of the most effective ways to strafe in this game, and you'll see that the most when you see people one clip, regardless if they're on MNK or controller. Mirroring is where you are literally one-to-one mirroring their strafe, and I have footage going over right now that gives you a pretty good idea of the way that I'm strafing when I'm shooting people. Now, obviously that gets a little bit more complex when I do like a jump lurch strafe or something, but I'm generally one of those people that relies on anti-mirroring more than mirroring. But mirroring, like I said, is one of those things where you are a one-to-one strafe to your enemy and you're matching it perfectly. Now, mirroring is one of those things that's a little bit harder to do than anti-mirroring personally, but it is one of those things that will like essentially guarantee that you hit shots on them, because you're not really aiming, you're more just moving in the direct motion of your enemy. Now, anti-mirroring is a little bit more complex, but it's where you're doing the opposite of the strafe of your enemy, where like if they're doing a smooth medium speed left AD strafe, it will allow you to do a DA strafe, and it's essentially a little bit easier for you to shoot them in that aspect because you know what direction you're moving in accordance to what direction they're moving, and that helps the most in close range fights. But those two strafes are the most important things for you to use in Apex Legends. With mirroring and anti-mirroring, it allow you to utilize a mechanic in the game called recoil smoothing, where your recoil is actually reduced due to the way that you're strafing. So those who are doing the really fast AD strafes where they're not really moving much, they're kind of moving in place, try to steer away from that unless you're using a gun like a wingman, because it really is hard to shoot when you do that. But for, you know, controller players, it may be a little bit easier to shoot that strafe because of the way the aim assist works. They don't have to move their joystick as much when you have a really short strafe. So I'd highly recommend using a little bit longer, trying to, you know, mirror and anti-mirror, and it'll help you improve in that way. For topic number 4, we're going to be talking about reading your enemy strafes. Now, reading your enemy strafes is definitely a little bit more challenging than strafing yourself, because you really have to pay attention to the way that they're moving and understanding what type of strafe mechanic you need to use based on what they're doing. Now, aim training, going back to topic number 1, will help you a lot in this aspect, especially if you're using something called a dodge scenario, which will be in that list of the GitHub scenarios that I gave you guys. But, you know, reading your enemy strafes is one of those things where you really have to pay attention to what direction they're moving. And if you're someone like me who likes to primarily use anti-mirroring or mirroring, then you have to understand what direction you need to go in accordance to your enemy. And obviously spacing matters for that type of thing, you know, how far away you are from them and like when to utilize that type of strafe. But the one thing that really helped me when I was trying to learn how to, you know, measure what direction they were going and when they were doing it is that I would tell myself when I'm in the moment, no matter what kind of fight I was in, not to change direction until they change direction. And that's going to be something that really helps you both with mirroring and anti-mirroring in the aspect of, you know, waiting to change the direction. If they're moving right, you're moving left, and you don't stop moving left until they start moving left. And then at that point you start moving right. And that's what helps you build that consistency with anti-mirroring. And there will come a point where you do that enough to where it just essentially becomes muscle memory for you. And, you know, you're always gonna have to be conscious about what your enemy is doing for a strafe, but you will have to think about it less the more that you do it. So for topic number 5, we're going to be talking about watching and learning from your favorite creators. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean a pub creator. This can be anyone that you necessarily look up to. For example, I'm going to be using Hollow, Faide, and Leamonhead as examples for this, because these are 3 people that you could really learn how to play the game. Not even just how to aim, but how to play at a level that they play at. Now, you know, Hollow and Leamonhead are 2 personal friends of mine, so I wanted to use them as an example because they're both very talented players, and I wanted to use Faide because everyone knows who Faide is, and he's a crazy player. So when I say watch and learn from your favorite creators, I mean understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. So whether it be a movement tech, whether it be a type of strafe, whether it be a way that they're positioning themselves, try to break down their gameplay when you're watching them to have a better understanding of what they're doing and why. Now, you know, sometimes there's not going to be a rhyme or a reason behind doing things. Sometimes they're going to be a little silly just to do some, you know, silly, goofy things. But 90% of the time, there is a reason as to why they're doing what they're doing. And it can be for, you know, recoil smoothing because they're strafing a certain way, or it could be an outplay with a mantle jump, or, you know, zipline bouncing to try and get over their head, you know, to get a positioning advantage. Whatever it may be, there's always a rhyme or a reason for something when your creators are playing. And that's honestly one of the best things you can do if you don't want to play the game yourself. Now, you're going to have to play the game to improve in and of itself, but you do have to, you know, watch other people and understand why they're doing what they're doing. Otherwise, you know, it's not going to come to you nearly as naturally. And, you know, if you're a ranked player, this applies to you as well with trying to learn how to rotate correctly. Let's just say with some of the top pro players like Hal and Sweet, you know, watching them and having an understanding of why they're rotating the way that they're rotating and why they're taking fights or not taking fights. You know, watching them will help you have a better understanding as to the decision making, not only with just, you know, basic movement and positioning, but also the more advanced stuff as to, you know, different methods or strategies of doing a certain rotation or strafing a certain way or aiming a certain way. You know, there's always a rhyme or a reason. So make sure to watch some of your favorite creators and try and break their content down as much as you possibly can and learn from it. Now, for topic number 6, we're going to be talking about something called R5 Reloaded. Now, if you guys don't know what R5 is, it's essentially a modded version of Apex that's based off of a Season 3 build. And R5 has a lot of really useful assets for you to improve in actual Apex. So for people who don't like aim training and haven't heard of R5, definitely check this out, because this is like a middle ground between Apex and aim training where it's both. So, you know, you could use the flow state aim trainer built within R5 that allows you to practice different aim scenarios that are in the game. Or there's another method where you're playing on community servers, like a 1v1 server, for example, where you're fighting real players, but you're not, you know, playing the standard BR or mixtape in actual Apex. You're just 1v1ing people. Every time one of you dies, it just sets you into another 1v1, and you just keep doing that until you don't feel like doing it anymore. And honestly, I have to say that R5 has been one of the best assets for anyone to use in terms of improving on Apex. So I highly recommend downloading this, and I'll leave a video in the description. I will be making my own video on it at some point, but you know, R5 is one of those things where if you haven't tried it yet and you're a PC player, you definitely have to do that. I'm sorry, console homies, this isn't something that you'll be able to do, but those who are on PC and want to give this a shot, I highly recommend it. It's a great tool to use. So for topic number 7, we're going to be talking about mindset and approach. Now, mindset is a very important thing in this topic, because if you're not thinking about what you're doing or the things that you're trying to improve on while you're playing the game, then it's not going to happen, right? You can do all of this different, you know, training and aim training and practicing in the range and doing all that, but it's not necessarily going to help you if you're not thinking about the aim mechanics while you're trying to do them or fight them in game. Now, mindset is extremely important, because if you're not thinking about them, then 1, you're just not going to do it, but 2, you're not going to like have the feeling of that success and be able to chase it because you haven't done it yet. When I say mindset, I mean staying conscious of what you're trying to do while you're in the middle of a game. So while I'm shooting someone, and this isn't something that I necessarily do much anymore because of how long I've been doing it for, it's become a little bit of second nature for me. But, you know, you have to be conscious of the type of aiming that you're doing, and, you know, watching those strafes and being reactive and being conscious of all of those things that I talked about earlier in the moment. And, you know, it's not going to be something that is going to come to you right away, but the more that you work on it and the more that you think about it in game, the more you're going to do it. A lot of the movement players in this game are successful because they're thinking about going for X movement tech during this fight, or when they're fighting in this POI, they're going to try and do this clip. You know, they're thinking about that kind of thing before they do it, which is what allows them to execute it correctly. Now, with aiming, it's just as important, because if you're not thinking about, you know, your enemy strafe and you're just blind, you know, going into it, then what's going to happen is you're going to get caught off guard and your aim's going to go all shaky because you're not thinking of what direction they're going. And it's just overall going to hurt you. So you really have to pay attention to your own consciousness when you're in the game and focusing on what you want to improve on in the moment. Now, for topic number 8, this is a very, very important topic. It may seem small, but it genuinely will make a world of a difference. Have fun with what you're doing. If you take it too seriously and you're, you know, angry about the lack of improvement that you've been seeing and you hyperfixate on it too much, then it's going to become, you know, your own mental battle when you're playing the game, to where like you're just not happy with what you're doing ever. I went through this personally, and I have to say, having fun with what you're doing is one of the most important parts about, you know, just playing the game or trying to improve at a game. You have to enjoy the high moments where you're doing really well and you're playing at the level that you want to, and you have to understand why you're having those down moments and why you're not achieving that. And you can't take it as a necessarily bad thing. You have to take it as a learning experience. Have fun with what you're doing, because if you don't, it's not going to go well, you know? One example of this is learning movement. Anyone who is a movement player or, you know, has any type of movement, you know that feeling of successfully pulling that movement tech off that first time. That feeling is what you should be having anytime you're learning how to do something in this game. You have to have fun with it. You know, it's just not going to go well if you don't. Anyways, guys, this is going to close out the video for me. I appreciate you guys for hanging out and watching it. This is a video I've had that was pretty highly requested in terms of just being able to improve. If you have any questions, be sure to drop it down in the comments. There's some times where I don't necessarily articulate my thoughts correctly. So if you get it confused or anything, let me know and I will try to elaborate for you. But I appreciate you guys for hanging out. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. I love y'all, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. On me.